So I've been playing Echo Knight. FromSoftware, generic reviewer intro. I want to kill myself. Oh yeah! As much as I hate doing the old developer background story opening that basically reads like a fucking play-by-play of the Wikipedia page, I have to admit that I'm quite intrigued by FromSoftware as a whole. And I haven't even played Dark Souls yet. I do own it though, and I will totes fondle it at some point. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But digging around online looking for obscure horror games, FromSoftware is a developer I often come across. I mean, besides like 80% of their catalog consisting of big robots fighting big robots or dark caves fighting dark caves, they also have games like David Bowie Simulator, where you faff about in space for a bit and then talk to ghosts like projections of ghosts. Or Gay Men, the RPG.
You ready for this? Yeah!
But the one that's definitely piqued my interest most of all is the game that's all over the fucking title of this video, leading exactly to why I hate these types of intros, because they are totally pointless. On a cold, rainy evening in Noirland, our protagonist Richard Osmond receives a letter from his deceased father Henry. Inside the letter was a small key and a... God damn it. Hello? Oh, good day, Mr. Standard Adventure Game Plotline. Oh? An epic adventure, you say? Yes, quite interesting. Will it perhaps involve mysterious artifacts, ghosts, and or ancient relics? Or how about some murder? Preferably on an old-timey train? Oh, quite. Well, I say that this is right up my alley then. Haha. Yes, right. Mwah. I love you too, dearest. Goodbye. I'd like to start off by saying that I really like this game's aesthetic. Though I will admit that sometimes I wasn't quite too sure what the fuck I was actually looking at. While being cinematic during cutscenes, which is like 80% of the game, it looks pretty cool. I mean, god damn it, just look at this big polygonal boat. There it goes, trying its darndest to be cool, to be cinematic. And holy fuck, is it beautiful. To me, a game like this is like the little engine that could. I mean, it's clearly made by people that weren't very sure of what the fuck they were doing, but they had a vision. And that vision was whatever the fuck this is. I did not edit that in any way, by the way. That's just the type of game that this is. But anyway, while exploring, getting your nose up in all of that business, the textures and models are definitely a lot less friendly. And the same can be said for the animation, sound effects, and writing respectively. But it does present a neat little story nevertheless. About murder, mystery, and ghosts. Which raises the strange point that only the ghosts seem to be voice acted, as everyone amongst the living is as silent as a dead person. I may just be looking into that a bit too much, but I found it pretty interesting in any case. Doesn't quite excuse the fact that Richard himself isn't really a person though. Despite him technically not being a silent protagonist, he doesn't really say much, if anything. Which didn't really incline me to give a shit about him, or his grandpappy for that matter. No, I was more interested in the individual stories behind the ghosts. Ooh. Now, these ghosts are also part of the game's main mechanic. Basically, there are two types of ghosts. The black transparent ones, and those that still kinda look like actual polygon people. The latter are actually hostile, and will attack you whenever they get the chance, but they can only exist in places where there is darkness. Considering how well people animate in this world though, I strongly doubt Richard can put up a decent fight. So, what you need to do is turn on the lights every time you enter a room. Excitement! And the rest of the game as you running errands for the transparent dudes by way of solving puzzles so they can pass on and leave behind items what you need and shit. Each one of these errands is its own little story arc, and I believe there to be about 26 of them in the entire game, some of which are optional. These include anything from playable romantic flashbacks to entire reunions of long-lost family members. It's honestly pretty neat. And the best thing is that all these stories are all rather short. So it keeps a nice pace going as there's always some kind of mystery suspended over the somewhat bland main plotline. But yeah. To break it down, the entire game is essentially one big chain of puzzles. This would have been really horrible and repetitive if it wasn't for the puzzles themselves being so goddamn creative. At one point, for instance, they make you play around with minecart track switches to break blockages. There, goddamn. And there's also a part where there are two mirrored rooms on opposite sides of a hallway, and you have to figure out how to get rid of a ghost in one room by using the other. It's not rocket science by any means, though some puzzles later on do get a bit cheap as they start changing the established logic of repeated elements, only without any indication of that being the case. But other than that, I really like how they varied up the puzzles by actually utilizing the game's environments very well. Being a first-person game on the PS1, the controls are obviously going to be a bit shit. You walk around with the D-pad, but look up and down using L1 and L2, and strafe left and right using R1 and R2. It kinda works once you get the hang of it, I guess, but I couldn't help but feel that strafing with L2 and R2 would have made a lot more sense contextually. And a quick turn button would have been nice as well. Anyway, I shit on the game for not using analogs, but here's a snippet of a review of the PS1 game Alien Resurrection that says, "The game's control setup is the most terrifying element. The left analog stick moves you forward, back, and strafes left and right, while the right analog stick turns you and can be used to look up and down." Whoa! So considering the levels of present at that time, I think it can be excused. The game does offer different control schemes though. I still chose the default because I kind of felt that that's what the devs had intended, but there is a Kingsfield control scheme should you deem that less awkward somehow, and two other ones both centered around strafing. Also, you can adjust the walking speed, which is a fucking godsend. I'd legitimately go so far as to say that fixes about half of the game's awkwardness. Overall though, I do believe that they did the best with what they had here. It's just that when compared to modern control standards, it just hasn't aged all too gracefully. In terms of atmosphere, the game tends to be a bit hit or miss. When the lights are off and there's a legit threat of ghostiness looming over you, it can definitely be a bit tense, and the voice acting and music are pretty sinister and bizarre as well. But a lot of the time, the game is quiet. No music, very little sound effects, and mostly just you walking around a small area doing puzzles. Which can be a bit creepy upon entering a room, as there's always a little inkling of spooks whilst quickly searching for the light switch with the awkward as fuck controls. But once the lights are on, the game almost entirely loses its edge. If the ghosts could turn off the lights after a certain amount of time, for instance, then that would have been great. But that never happens, and most, if not all, light switches are all placed where they would be, being right by the door. And what most definitely doesn't help is that the ghosts aren't really any threat in general. Upon encounter, you either just step aside or turn around, and they likely won't be bothered to then chase you around either. And sure, there are a few near insta-death traps, but only a couple, and healing potions aren't exactly in short supply. So, not only is this a bit of a missed opportunity to really utilize this mechanic and turn it into something more than a simple gimmick, but it also makes the game just a bit too dull at times. And no, not like to the point where I completely lost interest or anything, but when there aren't any stakes at all to worry about in your horror game, you really need the story and atmosphere to carry along the experience for you. And here, it doesn't necessarily always do that, as a large part of the game consists out of you dicking around in well-lit rooms with very little story or audio. And again, it's not like the entire game is like this, and there are plenty of times where it definitely keeps the pace going by having frequent events happening, but with the game being as short as it is, I feel like there should have been a bit more. Though I can see it appealing to the Myst crowd, and the feeling of isolation it could potentially create is pretty neat as well. It just didn't make the simple puzzle adventure gameplay any more interesting to me. That said though, the game does have a day and night cycle for the 5 whole fucking times you actually spend outside. Fuck adding proper sound effects or making the light mechanics more interesting. We need some of that realism, bitches! I'm just janking the game's cock though, as it's actually a really cool touch. Overall, I'd say that it's aged in a bit of a weird way, which is a nice way of saying that it hasn't aged very well at all, but that it also has a ghost casino. It controls like fucking shit and it's clearly made on a shoestring budget, but it's also a neat little artifact in that it was fairly ahead of its time with how it utilized environmental storytelling. And it's still a pretty solid adventure game either way, with some really cool side stories and characters. I'd say that it's definitely worth giving a try if you're into weird obscure horror shit, or if you happen to have a fancy for FromSoft.
Go on then. Kiss. You know you want to, mate. Just do it. I ain't gonna judge you. Well, not to your face, at least.